I remember when I only have started to learn about map, reduce and filter, it was really difficult for me to understand when I need to use each of them. But now, based on this experience, I know how to explain it as easy as possible. Let's start from the forEach function. I have a simple array of ages. And now imagine that you have a new business rule. Valid ages for your company are only from 18 until 100. And now your task is to filter the valid ages from this array. So at first, let's solve this problem with a common for loop. And now, inside of this for loop, let's initialize our variable. So for filtering these ages, I write a new if statement. And inside of this if statement, we will check that the age is valid. Let's say that both numbers are included. So the first statement is if our age is higher or equal to 18. Then I write and if our age is less or equal to 100. So in this statement, we create a range from 18 to 100. Now it means that at this point, the age is valid and we need to add it to some kind of array. So let's create a new array. And now let's push the current age into this array. So let's log to the console the valid ages. And now we see two numbers, 35 and 37. So if you look to this array, you will find that only two numbers are valid. So this is a pretty common task that you need to do, and for that you can use a common for loop. But now let's solve the same problem with the method for loop. So at first, let's declare a new array, valid ages. I put 2 at the end of this array because I want to initialize an array with keyword const. And now let's write our method forEach. So this is a method that we can attach to any array. The idea of this method is the same as in the for loop. So we go through each value of your array. Then we typically write anonymous function and curly braces if we want multiple lines. Let's expand this curly braces. And inside of the parentheses, let's write a name that will have a value of each our item in one iteration. So basically we write the same thing as we declared on this line. And this is the reason why I write age. And now let's write the same if statement as we have in our for loop. Then let's log to the console the valid ages too. And now you see the same result in the console. So this function does the same thing as a common for loop. And initially you might think that this is a little bit more complex, so why we need two different for loops? So actually you might write with a common for loop, but if you start to learn some frameworks like React, you will find that most of the for loops are written in this way. So this is just a convention of this framework. Also, this method has its own advantages because if you look to this code, you will see that we don't have the index. Like in our common for loop, we must declare I. So here we don't have this index and we can directly access the variable just by writing this name age. So basically it removes all the unnecessary code that is inside of the for loop. But this function has several limitations. So at first we don't have the index and it means that we can't access the values based on the index. So basically the same as in the while loop, you actually can create your index if you want, but typically if you need an index, you will use a traditional for loop. So then, if you understand the forEach, it will be much easier to understand the remaining functions. So now let's talk about map, and the first thing that you need to understand that this is also a for loop. We attach this method to an array in the same way as we did with forEach, and this function has a specific semantic. So it takes each element from our initial array and then it maps, so it converts them to a new array with the same length. So for example, we have an array data that contains several numbers and some of them are invalid. So we can convert them into the numbers and then we can convert all invalid numbers to the 0. And this is actually the task that suits very well for map. So we take each item from this array and then we modify it into a new item. And one of the important constraints that you have, the output array is fixed and it has the same length as the initial array. So let's start coding it and I will show based on the examples what happens. we start from the anonymous function and with the curly braces. So now we can expand them. And then as before, here I can write a name that will take a value of each item in our array. So here, because our array data is just an abstract array, we can write something like item or element. And this will be equal to each value from this array, because we remember that map works in the same way as a for loop. Then we need to create an array where we will store these items. So because the output is an array and map always returns an array, we can declare this array on the same line with the map. And now I will not do anything, let's just log to the console the map data. Now in the console, you can see that we have an array with the length 4 and with the values of undefined. And this is because map always returns an array with the same length as our initial array. Then to push our item into an array, we need to write the keyword return. And then let's write the value of what we want to return. So if we just write the item, it would mean that we return the initial array, because we go through each item of the initial array and then we just return it. Now let's convert it into a number. For that, I can call an object number. Now we see that we have an array of numbers and the last number is none because for s can't be converted to a valid number. And for example, instead of the none, we want to see 0. So let's add a new if statement. I check that if I convert the item into a number, and then if this is equal to none, for that I can't control it with free equal sign, I must use a function isNone. So now we wrote that if the converted item into a number is equal to none, it means that we need to return a default value, which is 0. And now you can see that in the console we have 1, 2, 3 and then 0. Now let's talk about the method filter. We have the same initial array and now we want to remove the invalid parts. So this task perfectly suits for filter method because the semantics of this method is to go through each item of our array and then to remove the unnecessary ones. Now we will not convert our strings into the numbers because filter shouldn't modify the data. It should only remove the unnecessary ones. As always, we start from the same anonymous function and then inside of this function we pass a name. Now this name will have a value of each item from our array. And then let's think about the output. We want to return an array that contains elements from the initial array. So as the function map, filter also returns an array, but at this point the length is not fixed. So we start from an empty array. Let's write a new variable filter data on the same line. And now let's log it to the console. So as you see, initially method filter returns an empty array. So now we can start writing our condition. For that, let's write a new if statement. Now inside of this if statement, let's convert our item into a number. And now let's check that if this number is not equal to none, it means that this is a valid item and we can push it into our array. So for that we write return item. So now in the console, I see 3 numbers, 1, 2 and 3. And you see that the types of these numbers are the string. Now let's talk about the most complex method, reduce. So we have the same initial data and now we want to sum all valid elements to one number, which is a total sum. And this will be equal to 6 because 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equal to 6. So we don't count invalid elements. And this is exactly the work that reduce method does. So this is the same for loop that goes through each item from an array, but then it converts all these values into just one result. As always, we start from the anonymous function. Then inside of it, we will not pass only one name, we will pass 2 different names. So the first one is a total. So this is what we will return. Eventually, it should be equal to 6. And the second element is the item. So it will have a value of each element from our array. But now we also need to write a default value. So for that, I will expand curly braces. And then between curly brace and parentheses, I will add the default value for total. So let's start from the 0. So this can be a little bit tricky, but you need to understand that this is actually the same as writing let total is equal to 0. So the name is the first parameter of anonymous function and the value is what we have before the parenthesis. But now let's declare a variable total sum on the same line. And let's log to the console the total sum. So you see that if I don't return anything, it is equal to undefined. So this is the default value that all functions have if they don't have any return value. But now let's return the total. And you can see that this is equal to 0. So then our idea is to take each item and at first to convert it into a number, then to validate it, and then to add it to the total. So at first, let's convert it into a number. Then let's validate that this is not equal to none. And now it means that we can add it to the total. If I save this file, you can see in the console that the total sum is equal to 6. So it means that we took the first 3 values from this array, we converted them into the number, and then we summed them together. And also, we have tried to convert the last number of the initial array, but then we found that this is equal to none, and we just ignored it. I understand that without practice, all these functions might feel very complex. But the most important that you need to remember that all these functions are just for loops that complete a specific job. You can write all of this code without these functions with just a for loop, but in many cases, the for loop solution will be much more unreadable. In the next video, we will practice with map filter and reduce functions.